Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, August 18th, day 682 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
Hundreds of thousands of Israelis took to the streets yesterday to demand the release of the hostages. The war is ongoing, however, and Manny will update us on what is happening on the Gaza front. We'll also learn about another retaliatory strike on the Yemenite Houthis and their quick response. In the wake of massive manpower needs, the army is offering thousands of draft dodgers a one-time amnesty. So Manny will fill us in on all of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. This morning, the city of Sderot is reportedly warning residents that they will likely hear loud explosions throughout the day due to military operations in nearby Gaza. The city is about 7 kilometers or 4 miles from the northeastern edge of Gaza City, where the army has been concentrating its war effort ahead of a plan to take over the enclave's largest city. So this is not yet the plan to conquer Gaza City, but Manny, let's start with what's happening on the ground today.
So for the past few days, the IDF has been operating in the Zaytun neighborhood. It's sort of on the southeast-ish of Gaza City. The army's operated in there before previously, but basically around a week ago, the army launched a new offensive there. And as far as I understand, it's sort of a preparation ahead of the major offensive that will see Israel surround Gaza City and then later on capture it. Under the plans that have been approved for this operation, the civilian population in Gaza City, around 1 million civilians, will need to evacuate. So the army so far only issued evacuation orders for the Zaytun neighborhood. And in there, the army has been reported that it's been demolishing tunnels and finding weapons and killing Hamas operatives. There was even a strike a day ago against a group of Hamas gunmen who were spotted in the courtyard of the Al-Ahli hospital, which is in the Zaytun neighborhood. So there is fighting taking place. They're nothing face-to-face yet, but we are seeing strikes on Hamas gunmen. Civilians, I believe some are evacuating, but there are still civilians in the Zaytun area. And I believe that in the coming weeks, maybe even less than in the coming days, the army will issue a wider evacuation warning for the entirety of Gaza City so it can begin the next phases of this operation.
Before we start talking about the plan as we know it, late last week you had a report about a huge amount of cement that was used to block up some of the tunnel structure. Tell us about this.
So that was in Beit Hanun, which we've talked about on the podcast, and we mentioned how massive the tunnel network was in Beit Hanun, an area where the army completely destroyed Hamas's local battalion there. And instead of blowing up all of the tunnels, some of the tunnels were blown up. The army sealed 7 kilometers worth of tunnels in Beit Hanun. It's sort of the main route that goes through the entire city, which we talked about how it passes under all the homes of the Hamas commanders and under mosques and schools. So it took several weeks to do this, to actually pump all the concrete through. They had to run a pipeline from Netiva Sarah, from the border area, all the way into Beit Hanun. And sealing tunnels this way is cheaper and less risky than blowing them up, of course, but it is more time consuming and it takes longer to do it, whereas blowing them up is usually quite quick. But the army says it's, trying out different methods all the time of being able to render these tunnels inoperable.
Right. I remember early in the war, we were using seawater to flush out the tunnels. Is that at all still being used?
No, it was tried out for a very short period of time in areas near the coast, where it's possible to actually pump seawater in them. And even then, I was told that the success was limited. They stopped doing it after just a few weeks.
Okay, so yesterday, IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, was in Gaza, and he said in the morning that the military is going to approve the plan for the next stage of the war later in the day. So, Manny, has this plan been approved?
By Zamir, yes, it has been approved. It was discussed at the Southern Command, and then Zamir went to the Southern Command to discuss it with the officers and to go over the plans. And then he held another meeting with other top generals in the army So these plans have been approved by Zamir, but he will need to present them to the political level still for them to be approved by the defense minister, by the prime minister, and only then will Israel go ahead with them. So I believe that Zamir himself will present it to Katz, possibly in the coming days, and then from there, if Katz is happy with the way that the army has planned it, then the military will start beginning to call up the amount of reservists that it needs for this operation. It will begin to issue the evacuation orders, whatever's in the timeline. But from what we know from the general outline that the government instructed the army to plan was that the civilian population in Gaza City be evacuated to the south, that Israel increased the supply of humanitarian aid to areas outside of the combat zones, and they're giving around a 2-month window, so up until October 7th, 2025, for the civilians to evacuate. But I do think that we will see Israel begin the operation before that. That's sort of the goal, to evacuate the civilian population. I think we'll already see the army pushing forward into Gaza City before all the civilians evacuate, and that will help sort of encourage more civilians to actually leave.
So yesterday, Israel announced that it will renew the supply of tents and shelter equipment to Gaza beginning actually yesterday. And this is, of course, part and parcel of this plan. But Israel hasn't given this kind of aid for many months. Isn't that right, Manny?
I believe 26 weeks. It was the last time that Israel allowed tents and shelter equipment into Gaza. I'm not sure why this was something that Israel halted, but in the last few months, the aid deliveries have been mostly food and medical supplies and not shelter equipment. Regardless, the shelter equipment, as far as I understand, will be sent only to southern Gaza, so not to Gaza City where the civilians currently are. Israel wants the civilians to head to southern Gaza, and to enable that so that they can move, there needs to be adequate equipment in the area. There needs to be facilities for the civilians. There's around a million civilians in Gaza City, so they will need to let in quite a lot of aid supplies over the next few weeks to make it sort of make sense that all these civilians will head out of the combat zone.
So essentially, Israel is no longer talking about, for example, Rafah as this shelter city. Rather, they're setting up supplies, at least tents and other kind of sheltering supplies outside of Rafah, but still in the southern Gaza Strip.
From what I understand right now, it's still the Mawasi area and the central Gaza area, which are sort of connected. Israel hasn't yet announced a new humanitarian zone, but it's possible that they'll define some boundary and say that this is the area where civilians should go to when they announce the evacuation warning.
Okay. And what is happening in terms of foodstuffs and other kind of humanitarian aid?
So in the past week or so, we're seeing trucks enter Gaza. We're seeing about 300 or so, sometimes close to 400 trucks a day entering Gaza, and similar amounts also being collected and distributed by the UN and other international bodies. It's far from what the UN says. The UN says that at least 600 trucks of aid need to be distributed each day. So we're talking about half of that. And there's also airdrops being carried out, although the numbers of those are quite limited. So yesterday, 161 pallets of aid, which is around 5 or 8 trucks worth, were airdropped by several countries, including for the first time Denmark and Indonesia, the latter, of course, having no relations with Israel, which is interesting. But the airdrops are, I would say, mostly for show. The amount of aid entering through the airdrops is much more limited than just sending in trucks. But food and medical supplies and hygiene equipment, and now also tents and shelter equipment, are being sent into Gaza and actually collected and being distributed in the Strip.
So just to sum up the Gaza portion of our episode today, it sounds as though fighting is going on as usual. It's not face-to-face. It's more of these pinpoint operations where you talked about in the hospital courtyard, where we were reading about in an old cemetery, for example. And we're not yet at this the new thrust into Gaza City, but yet operating on the outskirts. Would you add anything to that?
No, that's correct. We are seeing operations in other areas of Gaza, still in Rafah and Khan Yunis. Like you mentioned, the cemetery that was in Khan Yunis, the army struck several gunmen who were spotted there. But it's definitely been lower intensity. The army's still working to uncover tunnels and demolish them, and finding weapons. It takes a very long time to go through all of these areas, but there isn't major fighting just yet. I believe that when the army pushes into Gaza City with perhaps multiple divisions, if that's what the plans have been selected as, then we will see more direct fighting and more intensive fighting, provided that Hamas doesn't just up and leave with the civilians like it has done previously.
All right, let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. So yesterday, the Israeli Navy launched strikes against a power plant south of Sana'a in the Houthi-controlled capital of Yemen. And of course, what came next, Manny?
No, the Houthis fired a missile again at Israel. Unsurprising. I don't think that anyone in the army thinks that these strikes on the Houthis will actually stop the Houthis from firing at Israel. It hasn't done for the past 14 times that Israel has struck the Houthis, so it's unlikely that another 15 times will. The Houthis are the Houthis. They just keep launching one missile every 2-3 days at Israel, or drones, most of them that don't even get here. They're mainly a nuisance because Israel knows how to intercept them, and the last time a missile actually hit Israel from the Houthis, I think, was at Ben Gurion Airport several months ago already now. And this strike that Israel carried out, interestingly, was launched by the Israeli Navy, not by the Air Force. Only the second time that the Navy has conducted strikes in Yemen. And, using missile boats and long-range missiles, they struck this power plant near the capital. And according to the local media, it knocked out several generators and caused some damage there. But this isn't going to be sort of changing anything. It's not changing the power balance here. The Houthis, of course, within several hours, set up a missile and launched it at Israel and said that they targeted Ben Gurion Airport. It was intercepted. There were no injuries. It did occur while hundreds of thousands of people were outside protesting for the release of the hostages, in addition to the million or even close to 2 million civilians living in the areas where sirens sounded. So it's definitely disrupts daily activity. But thankfully, the army knows how to intercept these missiles.
Right. It's definitely terrorism. It definitely disrupts. It definitely raises the anxiety level of an already anxious country. But it is not destructive usually at this point. So let's turn to our final item. And the IDF announced yesterday it would be giving draft dodgers, many, of course, who are members of the ultra-Orthodox community, a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card, an opportunity to enlist in the military without facing punishment for a desertion. So how many deserters are actually on the books right now, as far as you know, Manny?
So according to the IDF Personnel Directorate, there are only 14,600 or so Israelis, both men and women, who are listed as draft dodgers and deserters. And it's a bit of a sort of a complicated designation. And it essentially means those who have either begun the enlistment process and never actually drafted, or those who have ignored multiple draft orders over an extended period of time. The reason why it's only 14,600 is because it takes sometimes quite a long time to actually declare someone as a deserter or a draft dodger. So, we talk about these 80,000 ultra-Orthodox men who are eligible for enlistment but haven't yet drafted to the army. Most of them are not in this list, and most of them are not considered draft dodgers yet because they only just received their draft orders in the last few weeks. And therefore, it takes a long time for them to actually be considered deserters and evaders. Putting that aside, among these 14,600, the army is now sending out these notices, and they can, from starting last night, from Sunday night until Thursday, register to draft to the military. And by doing so, this opportunity basically allows them to enlist without facing jail time. Normally, if a draft evader would want to enlist in the military after evading for a year or 2 years, then they would sort of, as they begin their service, they would have to serve time in jail upon enlisting. So the army is saying that they will suspend that sentence and allow them to draft normally and not be given a criminal record. But if they violate the terms of their service, if they evade again, then they will, of course, have to serve whatever their punishment is, plus the desertion sentencing that they had before. They're not going to get off scot-free here. And the army has also warned that it won't allow anyone to abuse this system to both get out of military service and avoid jail time. There's no delays. So if you register and you'll be given a date to show up, you show up and you are sent immediately for basic training. There's no months of delays and waiting around. And additionally, the service time, it's not... There's a few service tracks in the army that sort of get people out of service, serving for 6 months and then you get released. There's none of that here. It's mandatory service time, which is 32 months for most male troops and 24 months for most female troops. There's some exceptions depending on the unit and the age, but in general, it's mandatory service. There's no workarounds here to get out of your punishment as well. The army doesn't know how many people will actually show up under this plan. They're hoping as many as possible, but it could be only a few dozen people show up, or maybe none at all, or maybe a few thousand. It's really unclear. And at the same time, the army is also going to ramp up the enforcement for people who are not showing up for their draft orders. The deserters both on the list and those who soon will be declared deserters among the 80,000 Haredi men who have not enlisted, the army will begin to ramp up the enforcement. We have seen in recent weeks a few draft dodgers being arrested, not in Haredi cities, but outside of Haredi cities, which has caused, of course, protests as well among the ultra-Orthodox community. But the army says it wants to ramp that up even further and start detaining many more draft evaders.
So this is the carrot and the sticks are waiting, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
All right, Manny, thank you so much for this update and all of your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by Adina Karpuch. If you have any comments or questions about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, Shalom.